Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Go Beyond. My name is Alyssa Robinson, and I am here once again with our senior pastor, Reverend Daniel Humbert, and our director of Children and Family Ministries, Julie Hawkins. And Go Beyond is a time where we can dig deeper into the message from Sunday together. So that message is available to you at all times. So go to tmumc.org/watch to catch up on our message from this week. But today, Julie is going to challenge Daniel with some tough questions about what it means to discipline for our kids in parenting. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Julie because, as I've mentioned multiple times, I don't have kids and I have no idea how to discipline a child. So I will leave that to the experts that have told me they are not experts.
No, we are not. And I don't know how much of this is me challenging Daniel or me reacting to a sermon that I heard on Sunday and asking my questions. So a lot of times when you're sitting there and you're listening to a sermon, you think, what about this and what about that? And so now I actually get the chance to have a captive audience and say, okay, answer these questions. So here we go. You talked about the perception that discipline is a punishment, but that's not exactly what discipline means in the Bible. That's not what scripture tells us. So, and I know we talked about it briefly on Monday, but can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I think in the minds of a parent and kids, we think of discipline as a negative thing, and it really doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be at all, literally. I mean, clearly we've all lived into it sometimes that way, and I'm guilty of that, but it doesn't have to be at all. And scripture basically identifies discipline as correction and training, and I sort of add the dimension driven by love. And correction and training, golly, can happen in all kinds of ways, right? There are teachings, there are opportunities to sort of guide, to redirect, to offer insight. And then, of course, this driven by love is sort of kind of what makes it distinctively both biblical and Christian, because that's who God is. God is love. And if God's the one who sort of initially disciplines us as people, then we ought to sort of mimic that in the way that we help discipline our kids. And so taking the time, and I know it's hard, I've been there, you've been there, in the moment, and you just want to stop that behavior or get that done. But to stop and say to yourself, so how can I use this moment, this time, this opportunity to teach something or redirect or offer guidance that will be helpful for the long term, not just how can I stop this behavior right here, right now?
Well, and I think when you mention training, that implies that it's ongoing, right, and something that's continual, because when you're training for anything in life, it's not just a one-time thing. Yeah. You work on it as you go. And so something we can...
A great example, actually, this morning, I was watching one of my favorite shows, Madam Secretary, and she's now president in episode, or not, in series 6, and she's disciplining her, I guess he's probably at this point about 18 or 19-year-old son, and he's made a post online, and they're using it as an opportunity to help correct his behavior, and they're also using it as an opportunity to teach him the ramifications of that behavior. That is to say, what does it cause? What does it do? And then they challenge him to apologize to the person that had influence over. So, I mean, there were multiple things there. There was teaching about what kind of ramifications are there with regard to posting, that sometimes those ramifications are you need to apologize, that's a part of making amends, right? But all of that's discipline, see? And that didn't involve a paddle, didn't involve a belt, didn't involve sort of, causing harm in the moment. It was all teaching, and yet it was needful discipline for his life.
Right. And okay, so we want our kids to be disciplined, but we have to be disciplined as a parent as well. And you talked about helicopter parenting and yo-yo parenting, and this is something we don't always focus on, is the discipline for the parents. And I'm going to be honest, for me, I think the biggest mistake I made is the yo-yo parenting, because man, they just wear you down.
Yep.
They wear you down. And in the moment when there are multiple of them coming at you, you just sometimes give in and you change your parenting. It's the yo-yo parenting. You're not consistent. So can you talk a little bit about how discipline affects us as a parent?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we all, well, I shouldn't say we all want to, but I hope or I believe that we would all want to be disciplined in our lives somehow, some way, right? Whether it's, again, either training athletically or health-wise, or maybe diet-wise, or certainly spiritually, we want to practice spiritual practices or disciplines. So why not so with parents, right? I mean, why not so with how we want to conduct our lives and do what it is parents are supposed to do, which is provide for our kids the opportunity to become less dependent on us and more dependent on God. So there needs to be some discipline and all that. And yet, I'm like you, I'm the yo-yo parent from time to time. And for me personally, it has more to do with guilt, because I tend to be harsh, just like my parents were harsh, or strict, I guess is a better way to say it, very strict, right? And I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, so I want things the way they should be, and this is the way it's supposed to be, and therefore you ought to do it that way. And sometimes I parent that way, and then all of a sudden I go, man, that was harsh, Humbert, you shouldn't be doing that. And so the next time I'm real lenient, right? And I kind of, and so that creates confusion for our kids, because they don't, golly, which dad am I going to get this time, right? Or is that the rule, or isn't that the rule, right? Is that the way I'm supposed to do that, or am I not supposed to do that? So yo-yoing is the one I'm most guilty of as well. And it's not helpful to our kids. So we need to try to figure out, number 1, identify it. Number 2, try to avoid it. And then number 3, just live more into sort of these concepts we talked about teaching and looking at the long haul, and certainly avoid shaming. I mean, that's a huge one. So that's what I would share with regard to that.
Yeah, shaming. That's my next question, because I think a lot of times shaming and discipline kind of go hand in hand, because when we are correcting behavior, it's often confused with shame in the eyes of the child. And we can be saying, I don't like this behavior, and the child will interpret it as, I'm bad, not the behavior's bad. And so I just talk a little bit about shame and how we need to be intentional about the way we are messaging discipline to
Well,
kids.
I think we, and I don't know if it's just America or not, but I think we in America really struggle with shame. We either don't understand it, or we underestimate its impact. And, very simplistically put, shame is about the person, guilt is about the action. And we always want to err on the side of guilt, not shame, right? And so pointing to the action, addressing the behavior, and sort of going what I would call over and beyond to make sure we're talking about that and not the child, not the person. And shame, man, leads to all kinds of bad stuff, because when we are living in our shame, we make poor decisions. We clearly don't feel good about who we are. And then sometimes those poor decisions are lived out in harmful ways, either for me or for me on other people. And so we want to try to avoid that at all costs. And so for me, I don't know that this is the most appropriate way to do it, but I err on the side of talking it out so that I can help my child better understand this is not about you. This is about a behavior that you've done that we want to try to correct. And so we have these conversations. And for Sadie in particular, that she hates this. She's like, is this going to be another one of those conversations? Are we going to have to talk this out again? Yes, we're going to talk this out. So anyway, that's how I choose to deal with it. And I just want to highlight that shame is a hugely devastating issue for we as people. And we need to try our level best to avoid shaming at all costs.
Because eventually that shame will come out in behavior later on towards themselves, or they will act out towards other people. And
that's right.
That's not something that ever goes away. And it's not something that is tangible that you can see, but the impact lasts.
Right. And it's something, Kelly, we could have a whole worship series just on shame and the ways we need to try to avoid it and help other people avoid it. Maybe that's something to do in the new year.
Yeah.
Well, and I do have a question. As a non-parent, when you bring up the idea of shame, and initially when Julie said, hey, sometimes when you correct a behavior, even if you're approaching it in a positive way, they interpret that as they internalize it and they experience shame when you're correcting that behavior. Well, as a non-parent and an aunt of my niece and my nephew, my sister gives me full permission to correct behaviors. But as soon as I do, they burst into tears. They take it so hard. Even if I'm as careful and as loving as I could be with it, because they don't expect it from their aunt. If mom had said the exact same thing to them, they would have been like, oh, okay. But the fact that Aunt Alyssa says it to them, they fall apart. Yeah. Do you have any advice for non-parents when we're put in a position of correcting behavior?
Well, I would offer a couple of things, and then I'm sure Julie might have a couple too. One is I assume that Stephanie has sort of told the kids that it's all right for you to do that, right? In other words, they know that it's kind of on the table. Yeah.
Yes.
That's the first thing. That needs to be a stated fact that, golly, Aunt Alyssa's going to, every once in a while if something goes wrong, she's going to have. So that's good. The second thing is I would talk, and you're going to hate this, I would talk about the emotion. So say, golly, I know that was disappointing for you to hear, or I'm sorry that you're feeling this way. Can you talk to me about what that feeling is and what that's like? Because then that gives them permission to talk about that emotion. And that in and of itself helps them to move away from shame. Because a part of the way shame works is that I'm not allowed to deal with that. I'm not allowed to process that. And I'm not allowed to sort of own it. And so a part of that is for Aunt Alyssa, we have to talk that out. We have to talk about emotion, and that helps. So those are the two things I would add.
I would agree with that. And I would say, especially with the young age of John and Sarah, you're going to have to wait until they calm down. But hey, I know that really upset you when I said, don't jump off the roof, but Aunt Alyssa loves you. And sometimes grownups have to tell kids what to do for your safety or, whatever.
Right.
But just explain it afterwards, and they're not going to want to listen, but always try to, like Daniel said, always try to have that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. I just think the conversation helps. And because it helps, eventually, they're not going to cry anymore, or they're not going to sort of take it so personally, because they now understand, oh, now I get why this happens. It always goes back to why. Why is this happening? Well, now I have a better understanding of why this is happening.
Yeah. Does it bother you when they cry?
Well, Daniel made the comment, Alyssa, you're going to hate this, talking about emotion, because I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, and in my pure 8ness, it annoys me when they start to cry. My first thing is like, why are you crying? Why are you crying? Like this, I didn't even raise my voice, and I don't want that to be my reaction. I don't normally go back and talk about the emotion of it. They start crying, they run to mommy comforts them, then they come back and I'm like, okay, that's done. Let's move on.
Well, there you go. So, obviously everybody has to process differently, but you ask a question, and I do think that's one of the best ways is to literally just process it out. And eventually it won't be necessary anymore, because eventually they will get why this is happening. And so they don't have the same response. But see, all of this takes energy, all of it takes time, and all of it takes a responsibility. And as Julie pointed out, it takes a discipline. All of that makes it hard, right? Because 9 times out of 10, all we're concerned about is in the moment, stopping that behavior. And certainly sometimes that's literally just going to be the case, particularly with toddlers and young children. So we just need to stop the behavior. But there also is this reality that if it's discipline and not merely punishment, then we need to correct and train and do that out of love. And that's what eventually helps lead to better interface. And the fact that this is all relationally based. I love those 2 sayings about rules without relationship, leads to rebellion. We don't want that. We don't want rebellion. We do want independence, but we don't want rebellion. And likewise, relationship without rules leads to resentment. I don't want my kid at 21 or 25 being so angry with me because I didn't actually prepare them for independence in adulthood, because I never gave them boundaries and I never taught them how to deal with difficult times, right? So for me, those two sayings were greatly illuminating and helpful to me personally. So.
Yeah. So that's all I've got today. Those are my go beyond probing questions for the day.
Well,
challenging.
Well, and I want to give a special thank you to Julie for helping us lead these conversations over the past 3 weeks, because she's able to bring up questions as a mother, as our director of children and family ministries, that I wouldn't even think about. And so thank you so much, Julie, for leading us in these conversations over the past 3 weeks.
Absolutely. And thanks for leading our children and their families for many years, but certainly for these last 6 and 7 months. I know it's been unique and different. And I know that we've got some great participation and engagement by our families because of the unique ways that you have helped them engage during these times. So thanks for doing that. Good stuff.
No problem.
All right. So remember, everybody, as always, you can catch previous episodes of Go Beyond at tmumc.org/go beyond. And we're going to be live again on Friday afternoon at 12:30 to talk about some exciting things that we have coming up in the life of the church, centered around a path worth taking. And I'm not going to give too much away on that, but you're going to want to tune in and see what our focus will be for the next month. Bye, everybody.
Bye.